Welcome to Beneath the Wing. Just like air passing over the wing of an aircraft provides lift, the people we meet can also give us lift in life by sharing their stories of strength and success, connecting us all. Beneath the Wing explores the stories of those connected with the Minnesota Air National Guard's 133rd Airlift Wing with a little humor and learning along the way. I'm your host, Wing Command Chief Mark Legvold.
Joining me today on Beneath the Wing is Lieutenant Colonel John Zimmerman. He is our newest squadron commander here at the Wing, which means he just became the person in charge of the part of our mission that provides medical care for injured or ill people in the back of our cargo planes. He's also what we call a traditional guardsman, and that means he drills 1 weekend a month and a little bit over 2 weeks a year, because we're both laughing at that already. While balancing a full-time civilian job, a family, and a pretty cool volunteer gig, which we'll get into as well. So today we get to learn all about that. Congratulations on taking command and welcome to Beneath the Wing.
Thank you, Chief. Honored to be here.
Well, let's talk a little bit about what it means to take command and the people in the mission you're now responsible for.
So it's kind of like chugging a Red Bull along with a glass of chocolate milk. It's very soothing, it's very calming, and it's very exhilarating. And doing that kind of on top of a steel girder on a half-built building that you know has to go 20 more floors up.
Is the Red Bull and the chocolate milk a mixed drink, or is that two different drinks, double fisting?
It's basically just, I want to say bonked right in, but it is... It all comes together, right? Because it's exhilarating, it's exciting. I've been in the military for 30 years, and you know, the closer I got to this opportunity, the more I kept hearing friends and cohorts that had squadron commands like, "Oh, this is going to be the best time, the worst time, the busiest time. It's going to go incredibly fast, however," and you're going to look back and say, "Oh my goodness!" But it's the squadron is the execution piece of the Air Force. Things happen at the squadron level.
You're not a middle manager. You are a leader of people and a very specific part of the mission as a squadron commander, correct?
Exactly, and we get to put our thumbprint. Now you can't change everything about a unit. We have instructions and we have doctrine and we have ways that we do things. And the way I think about it and the way I've described it to a few people is I grew up in Duluth, and spending time down in Canal Park or living on the hillside and watching the ships coming in and out of the canal in Duluth. Big ore boats, just loaded down with taconite heading down lake. When they come out of the pier, if you're watching them, you can see them make a couple of degree turn once they're clear to make their right course. They don't turn fast. And they don't move fast and turn fast coming in and out of the harbor, because then you've just got problems. When you're moving something this big that has this much inertia, which is what a squadron has, you got to be real careful on how many degrees of rudder input you put in. But you can change direction. But as a commander, I only have a few degrees that I can work with.
Can you change the speed as a commander?
You can, but again, there's a lot of inertia, so you've got to slowly power up to increase, but you're constrained by, in a ship, the output capacity of the engines. In a squadron, you're constrained by it's more the capability of the people. So you talked about traditional guardsmen versus full-timers, right? So we have about 100 folks in the squadron, but there's only 5 people that are there Monday through Friday. The rest of us rotate through, although I laughed when we talked about 1 weekend a month and 2 weeks in the summer. When we're out doing air shows and showing people our aircraft and talking to them about what we do, I say 1 weekend a month and 2 weeks in the summer was a great recruiting slogan for the Army Reserve in the 1980s. Today, realistically, our squadron, if you're a flyer, you're going to spend the 1 weekend a month. You're going to spend 2 to 4 days a month flying. You're going to spend 2 to 4 days a month doing some other ancillary training that we're required to have. So our squadron has a spin-up time for individuals of about 6 hours to go out the door. If we get a call right now saying there's something that's going down, our training regimen, our battle rhythm, as it were, is set up so that at any moment in time, we could send people out the door either to plus up an aeromedical evacuation hub or station that's already working, or stand up a new one anywhere in the world.
Let's talk about the people that are doing that mission. You've got anything from a kid straight out of high school. I mentioned before we started the podcast here that one of your troops, Belle, was one of my guests, and yeah, new, fresh-faced, out of high school, although she came in fresh out of college, but young men and women that are joining the military and have no military experience. You also have folks that have gone through and completed a medical provider certification, either a nurse or a PA. You have all of this hodgepodge of people with certifications and degrees and experience levels. How do you mix all that so that you can get a team out the door within 6 hours?
So a lot of the prep comes on just a rolling month-to-month continual basis. We have a myriad of training requirements that our mission support crews and our training section takes care of. We hold individuals accountable, and we know that there's quite a few. We do training flights, like I said, several times a month to practice the skills that we have. We can take all of our equipment, bring it out to the aircraft, configure it, fly a mission to nowhere, as I like to say, fly around the flagpole and back. The getting the folks out the door involves an entire squadron worth of people. So the flyers are nurses and medics. So those are the ones that accomplish the care in the air. Behind and below supporting them are like our medical service corps officers, or our MSCs. Those are sort of experts in organizational management and utilization of an organization's tools. And then we have our medical administrative folks, like the 4 Alphas, which is the Armed Forces Surgery Code,
and
Air Force Specialty Code.
Yeah, Air Force Specialty Code, yeah.
Which you'll... So they process the paperwork on a live mission that tells us who the patients are, who we're expecting, how we can prepare our minds for these patients, and also divvy up among the crew who has a greater experience in a certain patient subset. They also generate the paperwork that tell us where the airplane is going, where it's coming from, who's on the aircraft. So we're in an interesting position, and there's this perennial debate among aeromedical evacuation, whether when I was a flight medic in the Army on Black Hawks, and we had this question: are we a helicopter unit that does a medical mission, or are we a medical unit that does a helicopter mission? So here in the Air Force Aeromedical Evacuation, I would say it's a pretty settled point that we are an operational unit that accomplishes a medical mission. There's a few out there that'll say, well, you're actually a medical unit that just happens to fly. But the preponderance of our requirements and training and a lot of our culture comes from the flying world. Does that answer your question?
It does. So you mentioned that you've spent some time in a Black Hawk as a soldier. How did you get there? In other words, here we are, you just took command of a squadron, you're a lieutenant colonel, kind of a big deal, as people would say.
Well,
people know you. I haven't seen your office, and I don't know if you have leather-bound books in there, but you got to get here. Where did you start? How did you start your military service, and what brought you to the military?
I would be happy to tell that. At some point, we have to circle back, because I also have to recognize our log dogs,
Got it.
our comm, and some of our other support folks. But
let's circle back on that right now then.
Okay.
So if I've spent my entire career on the ground, a mission support group guy, which basically is how the base functions, and that's been most of my life in the military. If I am just coming at this from a novice point of view, I think of medical care, I'm either thinking of a basic clinic or I'm thinking of a major hospital. Now, I know enough about aeromedical evacuation that it's kind of a combination of the two, but you have to be able to function as a ward in a hospital and taking care of patients. And that takes a lot of support. And like you said, you've got the people that are good at the records, good at the management, but there's still the people that have to keep the lights on, keep the radios working, and the phones working, and all of the necessary functions. And what you're saying is your organization has all of that.
Mm-hmm. Yes, we have logistics. They call themselves log dogs or logistics specialists. So they make sure we have the supplies and equipment that we need to accomplish a mission. Just like any hospital, you're going to consume bandages, you're going to consume IV tubing, needles, medications. We have communication folks that ensure that we are able to communicate patient requirements and needs now. A lot of it's web-based, but we have the capability to use radios, encrypted satellite communications to communicate anywhere. And then we have our BMETs or biomedical equipment personnel, and they basically fix all of the medical equipment that we perhaps overuse or break. So that's I think encompasses the squadron.
Got it.
Now we rely on other elements on the base for, housing, food, etc. But that's what's required for us to work. So for me getting here, way back on January 2nd of 1991, I enlisted in the Minnesota Army National Guard, the 1st Battalion, 94th Armor, up in Duluth. Grew up in Duluth and had a passion for aviation, had been a Civil Air Patrol cadet through high school. I was one of those kids, and now still an adult, that anytime a plane flies over, I just automatically am drawn to it. I was that kid that was drawing pictures of airplanes in the middle of class when the teacher was telling me to pay attention and saying, "That's not going to lead you anywhere." Mm-hmm. Ms. Johnson. So I enlisted in the Army Guard. They had medic openings. At the time, actually, the Air Guard was full. This was back in the early 90s.
Sure.
And so there was a waiting list, and I was kind of anxious to get out of Duluth. And it was senior year of high school. I didn't see myself going to college. Enlisted in the Guard, and I was a Sergeant Marty Gonchez who said, "Hey, take a look at these tanks." We had the old M48 Korean War vintage tanks. He's like, "If you enlist in the Guard," he's a great recruiter. "If you enlist, it's 6 years, 1 weekend a month, 2 weeks in the summer. Look at these tanks. We're not going anywhere." Mm-hmm. So I was like, he said, but if you like it, the active duty Army will take you. You just have to do 6 months back here, and then you can go back down to MEPS or the Military Entrance Processing Station. They'll give you a list of places, and you can pick where you want to go if you want to go somewhere. I said, all right, sounds good. So I went to basic training, Fort Knox, Kentucky, went to medical training down at Fort Sam Houston, Texas, and I really bloomed. So the people that know me know that in high school I was part of the graduating class that allowed the upper 50% to say that they were from the upper 50% on their college applications. Oh. So, but once I was out on my own and in the military environment, I really started to find traction. And what I know
I've got a clarifying question here. Were you one of those people that could say you were in the upper 50%, or were you the opposite of that?
Yes, I was part of the cadre. I was part of the base of support that allowed the other folks to check that block on their college application saying, "Oh, I'm part of the upper 50%.
On behalf of those people,
yes,
I'm sure they're very thankful. Somebody's got to be the bottom of the mug, right?
Yep. And so I came back from training, back to Duluth. I was like, yep, my future lies, as John Elton would say, beyond the yellow brick road. And I went back down to MEPS, and I said, hey, how far can I get from Minnesota? And the printout came, and the Army personnel specialist down there was like, well, Korea's open. I said, all right, sign me up. So 6 months later, landed in Korea, was all gung-ho, wanted to go to the 2nd Infantry Division and be up on the line. And then I got assigned to the 43rd Mobile Army Surgical Hospital, which was far behind the lines in a very support function. Mm-hmm. As a young, hardcore, gung-ho, 19-year-old-ish combat medic, I was crushed. Until I realized that 6 months later, the beds were comfy, the food was good, didn't have to spend a whole lot of time just sitting out in the field. We would roll up to support exercises with a forward surgical team and come back, and I was getting a lot of clinical experience. We had it was called an urgent care clinic. It was a kind of a scaled down emergency room, but we took care of about 8,000 Americans that were stationed at Camp Humphreys. We had a pretty busy airfield, and we would do both clinic, like urgent care clinic, 24-hour shifts, and ambulance response. So I did that for 2 years.
And you stayed busy at that.
Yeah.
That's a lot of troops to take care of.
Yep, and it was a lot of, I mean, bless our hearts, young Army enlisted folks, but they make some interesting decisions, and many times those result in urgent care visits. I got really good at stitches.
I'll bet.
Really good at some de-escalation and kind of rooting out what's the root cause of whatever's going on, what's the physiologic issue going on here, and how can we start addressing it. Worked with some great docs, worked with a great PA who really took to training us young medics. Spent 2 years there and then put in for the Army Flight Medic program. Got a slot at Fort Rucker, Alabama, with a follow-on to Fort Campbell, Kentucky, to the 101st Airborne. So now I'm 7 feet tall, bulletproof, graduated from the Army Flight Medic School, flying on Blackhawks, getting paid to go, 120 knots, 50 feet above the trees with night vision goggles. A couple times a week, because we had a ton of flight time.
Sounds like fun for a young man.
It was good, and then, as I started growing and thinking, all right, I want to grow my clinical practice, I want to do more clinically, and looking at some of the patient loads that we were having, and then had some heart-to-hearts with some of the leadership in the unit who looked at me and they were like, why are you just, literally, they're asking me, why are you just a medic? I'm like, well, because I really enjoy it. And they're like, yeah, except you seem to have the capability to do a lot more, and organizational wise, and people are really starting to look up to you by the way you act. And I was like, what, me? Yeah. So when I was offered re-enlistment, I made the choice to transition back to the Guard. I called up the 1st of the 94th Armor, and they were like, man, it's been a short 3 years. Yeah, come on back. Transitioned back, enrolled in college, and went to UMD for a year. And, I enjoyed the environment of the military, wanted to continue serving, and that's kind of an understated, I don't say it very loudly, but I gave my soliloquy at Commander's Call, and then during the change of command was I genuinely believe in our Constitution, both of the state of Minnesota and the United States of America. I believe in our country and our culture, with the clearly stated point that we are not perfect. We were not created perfect, and I'm using the air quotes on that. We are, however, on a path, on that long arc of justice which curves towards a place where we do fulfill what we say. Because remember, when our country was founded, there were people who legally owned and physically possessed the lives of other people. Women did not vote. But here we are today where women do vote.
Is part of your ethos of military service is one of your motivators in military service the belief that you feel we are a part of the forward progress of the country?
Yes. To create a space behind us and among us where discourse can take place, where there can be discussions, where there can be provocative arguments for or against points.
I've had a lot of good conversations on this podcast with folks who have been champions of diversity initiatives and inclusion initiatives in the military. And one of the questions that I frequently have asked them after getting their point of view is, are we getting this right? Are we getting it right? And so I'll ask you the same question. Do you feel like we're getting it right in the military when it comes to making this a place where people can succeed and there aren't barriers to their success?
The challenge we have the challenge I have in answering that question is we still don't have an Air Force, or we don't have an Air National Guard that represents the state of Minnesota demographically. We don't have a military that demonstrates a mirror of our population. in order for us to know that we've reached that point, we will have to be as close as possible to that. Because how can we say that we've met all the goals when we just don't represent the population as a whole?
We've seen how that can be a helpful thing, and we're talking the outward appearance of our guard reflects the outward appearance of our state. When we were called downtown to provide security during civil unrest, and we looked differently than the community we're serving, and yet at the same time, our adjutant general, one of his talking points was, we are taking 500 people out of their community. 500 people live in the Minneapolis and St. Paul cities as a part of the National Guard in Minnesota, and we are putting them on the opposite line of their neighbors in order to protect the property and the rights to protest. And that does speak a lot, but I agree, we still don't look like the community that we serve.
And so I spent 10 years as a admissions liaison officer for the Air Force Academy, working many of those same goals. Like, how can we get out and spread the gospel of the Academy and ROTC? So one of the things that qualified me for that job was back in Minnesota, going to college, walked into the Army ROTC office at UMD and said, hey, I'm coming out of the active duty, looking at going to a nursing program on the GI Bill. And they said, great, here's a stack of paperwork for your scholarship. Fill it out, bring it back when it's fully filled out. We do PT 3 days a week. Just because you're prior enlisted doesn't mean that you're going to, we're going to cut you any slack. You need to do everything else. So come back when that paperwork is filled out. And I was like, okay. And I walked around the other side of the building and walked into the Air Force ROTC office and said, same thing. Hey, I'm coming off active duty, using my GI Bill, kind of interested in nursing. And the NCO looked up and said, great, we're always happy to have prior enlisted people here. And one of the detachment officers came out and said, well, you're interested in nursing, that's great. We've got scholarships that we can apply for at St. Scholastica here. And I said, oh, there's probably paperwork to fill out, right? And Sergeant Nelson said, yep, but why don't you just sit down, let's fill it out together. Let's just work through this. We'll put the paperwork in, and there's no obligation, but let's see if we can help you with this. I'm like, all right, this is a little bit better. I said, well, let me guess, PT, right? And they said, yep, we do PT 3 days a week, but if you pass your fitness test, you don't have to show up. And we play basketball on Fridays. I was like, sold.
Fun. But I'll go after the Air Force PT standards any day over the Army ones. They just don't look like fun. And I'm not a runner, so.
Really? For your height?
I'm not a runner. I avoid that like the plague. Always have.
That's why we have gators and bikes and planes.
I know, the Air Force. We fly places, right? And when we get off the plane, we hitch a ride on a truck. But no, that it brings that subtle distinction, that subtle difference of sit down, let me help you with this, and that welcoming environment, and keeping that welcome environment for anybody that wants to come in and join. Seeing the value in the human soul, sitting across the desk and saying, how can I help you? And we need good, well-qualified folks that are motivated to come in and join. And it worked out well for us because, here you are, comfortable chairs, hot chow, great people to work with, right?
And it was a good 4 years in ROTC. I learned a lot. I made that transition from enlisted to officer. Mm-hmm. So in our squadron, I would lose count if I tried to remember how many of our officers are prior enlisted. And we really pride ourselves on that mindset. And that's one of the things that, okay, so speaking about what are we doing, or are we successful? One of the benefits, one of the great things about the military, the U.S. military, and especially what I see in our squadron and across Minnesota Air Guard is, if you can meet the entry-level requirements and you can enlist and we can pay you to train and pay you to learn a skill, and if you choose to and we see promise in you and you see promise in yourself, you can move up and you can transition from an enlisted to an officer role. one of the downsides is, right, that's sort of a, how would I say, like a continuation of somewhat of a caste system. However, in a two-tiered, officer versus enlisted. But when I describe this to people, I say it's an opportunity for individuals to select which point they do. We cannot function without either, right? If we just had a bunch of officers walking around, it would be just a lot of discussions and PowerPoints. It's the non-commissioned officer corps, which forms the bedrock of the United States military. That's where the expertise is. That's where the grunt level motivation. It's the NCOs that are making sure that standards are set and adhered to, that people are led in the challenging environments, right? You can get anybody to perform maintenance on a ramp today, right? It's bright, sunny, a little bit of a wind, and it's nice. Mm-hmm. When it's 10 below and you need something done in an aircraft, that's the challenge. Or if it's like at the DEED where it's 120 degrees. And that's where the NCO Corps, because if it's done right, the airmen know, hey, Sergeant so-and-so would be out here with me. Mm-hmm. And sometimes they are right there, but...
it's that whole idea of, I like to think that it's the gift that we have, and speaking as a non-commissioned officer, for my entire career as an enlisted person, which I chose to stay enlisted because it is a better place to lead people through motivation, inspiration, and influence rather than conversations and PowerPoints and pontification. We actually get to go out there and work for directly influencing and getting the mission done on the day-to-day, which is great. And you've had the opportunity to experience both of that in your career. Which one did you like more?
There are some days I miss being just an E4 flight medic. Mm-hmm. Just had the job to do.
E4 is the greatest place to be.
So we have the E4 Mafia.
Everybody does
in the squadron, when I need to really get a finger on the pulse of, is this really working or not? Mm-hmm. I'll go down to one of the E4s and be like, all right, it's sort of okay, so explain to me how you understand this. If you want to know if everything's getting filtered down, are we doing this or are we not doing this? Are we doing this because we have to? But ROTC helped me transition from being that E4 to being an Air Force leader. Had a great experience at the detachment, Det 420 up at UMD, and then getting my nursing degree from Scholastica. Senior year, I was fortunate and actually did an internship with the 934th Airlift Wing through the Reserve Officer Association. There was a program where they were taking 1 to 2 cadets from each detachment. So 410 and 415 down here in the cities and 420 up in Duluth, and we would spend the drill weekends with the reserve. That launched me into my first permanent duty assignment because the reserve unit had just come back from their annual training tour at Launch Dual Regional Medical Center in Germany. And one of the captains said, hey, when you put in your dream sheet, you should put down Launch Dual, because apparently the system that the Air Force was using at the time, so new computer system, wasn't showing Launch Dual. It would show Ramstein in the clinic, but people over there were hearing that it was harder to get people to put in for Launch Dual.
So when you were going through the Reserve Officer Training Corps with UMD, was your intent to go back to active duty?
Yep. So actually, so Air Force, especially at the time, the obligation is active duty.
Sure. Okay.
So Army does both. The Army ROTC, you can go guard or you can go reserve status or active. Mm-hmm. Air Force ROTC has been almost exclusively straight active. Now there are some capabilities.
They've changed that just recently. Yep. Where you can go out of ROTC right into a guard or reserve unit.
Which we're getting right, and that's all about being more of a blended force.
Yep.
And you've been full Air Force longer than I, but when you think about, there's the active duty, there's the guard and reserve. Mm-hmm. In AE, in the Aeromedical Evac community, we are unique. How unique we are, but we're sort of a closed shop or a closed family. We've got 18 reserve, 9/now 10 guard. We just stood up a new unit down in Fort Worth, or are standing it up, and 4 active duty. So we say 95% of the personnel in AE are guard and reserve, but yet a lot of the proponent stuff is active duty. And yet when we go out and deploy, we the term we rainbow our crews together. So at an operating location like Germany, we might have 6 different squadrons that have sent people there, 1 or 2 guard, 3 reserve and 1 active duty. But we'll, instead of flying with just the 5 people you came with from your unit, we spread, we mix people in.
You mix everybody together and get a diverse look about your crew.
Yep, and it's based on, there it's operational diversity, right? So we talk about how diversity brings strength.
Mm-hmm.
So in there we think about it, strength across the unit. So we, with same thing like with drawing people from different backgrounds. So we bring people together, spread them out. So back to ROTC, otherwise I have to keep chasing squirrels. So ROTC, 4 years, lucky enough, got us slapped to Germany. My wife and I were dating at the time, and I still remember was walking around campus, and one of the other cadets, this was the spring of senior year, April-ish, said, "Hey, assignment drops have come. The colonel has them over at the detachment." So I raced on over and said, "Hey, sir, I understand that the order drops are in," he said, or the RIPS or whatever we call it at the time. He said, "Yeah, where were you going to go?" I said, "Well, I think San Antonio is the biggest medical center." He goes, "No, you had something else on your list." I said, Oh, you mean launch tool?" And he's like, "Yeah, where is that?" I said, "Well, it's in Germany." And, I caught wind that maybe they'd see. He's like, "You really think they're going to send a brand new lieutenant to a place like that?" I said, "Well, we got a dream." He's like, "All right, where else he had you? At San Antonio?" I said, "Yeah." "And what was he said, "Well, you're going to be disappointed. You're not going to Lackland." I'm like, "All right." I think number 2 was Travis out in California.
Yeah.
I said, "Travis?" He shakes his head. I was like, "Right, Pat?" And he shakes his head. And I was going through the list of like the most desirable large medical centers.
Yeah.
And I got down to Keesler Air Force Base on the
Mississippi
Gulf Coast. And I was like, "Keesler?" He was like, and he said, "No."
Wow.
I said, "Sir, I've run out of large, Air Force medical centers."
Yeah.
He goes, "Are you going to Germany?" I said, "Really?" He said, "Well, that's what I heard." And he holds up the paper. And I said something, "Are you?" He's like, "No, I'm not BSing you, and I'm still a colonel." And I was like, "Yes, sir." And he said, "Congrats." And I was like, "Wow." So kind of the dream shot. And I'm like, wait a minute, doing the math on, all right, so dating, can't bring a girlfriend to Germany. So I hopped in my car, drove down here, took my wife out to dinner at the Black Forest Inn, as a surprise. She's like, "Oh, what are you doing down here?" I'm like, "Well, I just want to take you out to dinner." And about halfway through the meal, I said, "Do you like the schnitzel?" And she said, "Yeah, it's pretty good." I said, "Well, get used to it." And I slid the orders across the table, and she looked at it. And my wife's a very pragmatic person, and she looked up at me and she said, "Well, you're going to need to propose to me, and then we're going to need to do this." And she just started going through the checklist.
She had a checklist for you.
I was like, "Yes, indeed." So
hope you did that quickly.
Did. That was April, May. We got married in August. I went TDY for 3 months down to Lackland to get trained up to go to Germany. And then we landed on December 31st of 1999, which, as we all remember, was Y2K.
Yep.
New continent, new country, new marriage, new adventure.
And it's been an adventure since.
Yes.
And the adventure continues. I've been speaking with Lieutenant Colonel John Zimmerman, new commander of our Aeromedical Evacuation Squadron. And we've got most of his career story. And when you stick around, please, we'll be right back. We'll finish that up and have a little bit of fun along the way. But in the meantime, please listen closely. Our Director of Psychological Health has a message for everybody, especially this September, which is Suicide Awareness Month. So we will be right back.
Hi, this is Mary Matson, the Director of Psychological Health for the 133rd. The Department of Defense and the 133rd are partnering during the month of September to bring awareness to veteran suicide. This year's slogan is Connect to Protect. Support is within reach. Please go to www.dspo.mil/SPM to find out more and to find some resources. If you or someone you know is in crisis or having thoughts of suicide, please call the Veterans Military Crisis Line for confidential support, available 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, at 1-800-273-8255 and press 1. You can also text to 838-255. If you would like to contact me, please call me at 612-713-2099. Again, that's 612-713-2099.
Thanks, Mary, for that important message. And again, if you are someone that needs help, please make sure that you reach out to her. I've been talking with Lieutenant Colonel John Zimmerman, new commander of the AE, Aeromedical Evacuation Squadron. And we've been getting to how did you get from a Duluth high school graduate all the way to becoming a squadron commander. And you'd just gotten assigned to Germany, and your girlfriend at the time gave you a checklist that required you to propose, and off you go to Germany, right?
Yeah, so we had been, dating through junior and senior year, and she was down here at the U. I was up in Duluth, making the long-distance relationship work, and we'd gone through a lot of the negotiations, whether it was overt or subtle, like where do you see yourself in life? Is this you and I a thing? Is there any other lily pad each one of us wants to hop to? The big test was when I did a Russian immersion between junior and senior year, going out for 2 months, and it was all right, we're each are going to see, is there something else that catches our eye? Is there anything else that, do we miss being together more than we like being apart? Came back and it was, no, business is, I don't say business as usual, that sounds bad. The excitement was still there.
That was a better way of putting that. She would have been disappointed in you.
And so we landed in Germany,
Yep.
Y2K, and started out with that adventure. As we all know, the lights did stay on.
Amazing.
Yep, the world did not devolve into caveman days. Although what nobody prepped us for was the Germans have this tradition of blowing a lot of fireworks off at midnight.
Ah.
So we were down, so for those folks that have been to Ramstein, right, which is our main aerial hub in Germany, the area around there is very Americanified. Of this wing, I would say a huge percentage of folks have spent time there, and so we use some terms like K-Town. So Kaiserslautern is the large German city near there, but they just sort of shorten it down to K-Town.
Mm-hmm.
Downtown K-Town, New Year's Eve, and all of a sudden all these fireworks start going off, and we're like, oh, guess we didn't get this on the briefing, but it was quite exciting. And then we spent 3 years there, and then rotated, which I had a great assignment doing med surg, really growing my nursing skills. So the AE mission, the Aeromedical Evacuation mission,
Mm-hmm.
can best be described as operating a community hospital that in the back of an airplane. So we convert C-130s, C-17s, KC-135s, KC-46s, C-5s, pretty much anything the Air Force has that has wings and flies,
Mm-hmm.
we can convert into carrying patients.
It was very impressive to me when I flew with Aeromedical Evacuation as a patient early in my time in this job, and they strapped me to first off, they let me watch taking this bare aircraft with nothing in it, and suddenly there's posts going up in the middle of it, and they're strapping gurneys onto it, or litters, basically a cot you can pick up and carry. And they strapped me down to one, and they practiced picking me up, carrying me in, strapping me in, and doing it so gently, but also quickly. And the communication that your folks have with one another during that process, it's impressive, and it's quick. You can tell it's well rehearsed.
So some of the neighborhoods we land in aren't the ones where you want to stick around a long time.
Mm-hmm.
So that's why we do practice that expeditious in and out with and we call it an ERO, or an engine running on load, or engine running offload. And we practice that regularly, where we don't want to shut the aircraft down, and you want to spend the minimal amount of time there.
Right.
But it's meds, what we call medical surgical or med surg level care.
Mm-hmm.
Now these are people that you don't have to be focused on every second in order for them to survive. And that's kind of the base level. However, we have the capability in the AE system to take care of people who are severely critically injured. And for that, we bring along a team called a Critical Care Air Transport Team, or a CCAT team. Okay. So our basic AE crew, or our nominal or textbook Aeromedical Evacuation crew, is 2 nurses and 3 medics. We can operate for up to about 18 hours worth of flying time. If we project that we might have a longer day, we can expand that out to 3 nurses and 4 med techs, and by regulation that allows us to be working for a total of about 24 hours. And that's including the spin-up time, configuration, flying until we shut the engines down. And those are, so a lot of our rules, regulations, guidance, doctrine, et cetera, is based on safety and building in a bubble of safety around us so we don't get so fatigued that we make bad decisions.
Right.
So that's what governs our lives. So we're taking care of mostly med-surg folks, and that's sort of our expected training level, or that's the level to which we train to. But if somebody's really injured, we can pick them up from the point of care, and it used to be back in the 90s, AE would only move stabilized, or they would move stable patients, which means they're been discharged from the ICU.
Yep.
Well, then the idea came around in the 90s, well, why don't we stabilize them while we're transporting them? So now we have these CCAT crews that have a critical care physician or an ER doc. So we've got a doc specialized in taking care of tenuous people, a nurse from an ICU that's experienced in taking care of tenuous people, and a respiratory technician. Mm-hmm. Now our whole en route critical care team picture in the Air Force also has some specialized crews that will take care of premature babies. So we have some neonate transfer teams. We have a specialized burn team that comes out of San Antonio, and then we have portable ECMO teams.
Okay, I just want to pause for just a second, because I know there's folks that listen to this that aren't necessarily in the military, and they just heard something that was odd. And that is why, when I think of a soldier or a sailor, airman, guardian, or Marine, I'm getting used to saying guardian.
Don't forget the coasties.
And yes, a Coast Guardsman. I don't think a baby is on a list of somebody that's eligible to serve. Can you really quickly tell me why the military needs to know and have specialized care teams that can take care of infants?
Yep, that's an excellent point.
And give an example of when we've had to do that.
I've done that before. So we have Americans stationed overseas. So we have bases in Europe and in the Pacific Rim.
Certainly.
And so many of those are, we call accompanied tours, where you get to bring your family with.
Okay.
And that's because we station folks there for 3 years. So there's sort of a balance of the longer you're in a location, the more ownership you take of the processes there, and the more you are invested in the activities of the unit.
Sure.
And so if you're going to be there that long, we really need to have your family there, because otherwise we're not going to be able to retain the folks that need this. So we have these overseas bases, and there's debate and there's discussion about it, but the value is that, number one, it's closer to areas of the world where there have been conflict. 2, basing in friendly countries is a direct, tangible, enduring expression of our friendship and our willingness to defend freedom and freedom ideals outside of our borders. And if there's something that, the 1900s taught us, was it's better to engage early and to be present than ignore and hope it goes away. Mm-hmm. So, we've got bases in Germany, Spain, England, and then in the Pacific Rim we've got Japan, Korea.
Sure. So we have to have people that are able to provide evacuation if necessary for the family members of our...
Yeah, so the family members are there, and
sure.
So we had one of the missions where we do missions from Washington, D.C., from Andrews, or Joint Base Andrews, whatever they're calling it this month, across the country. And so we landed and saw the manifest had a real young tyke on there and had an en route care team. And so it's a dependent, or my wife hates the term dependent, which a family member.
Certainly. we've talked a lot about AE, and
Oh, come on. It's like the awesomest unit on the
I
base.
know they're fantastic. They're good folks, but you mentioned 5 people work out there full time, and it's a squadron of almost 100 people, and you're included in that batch of not the 5 full-time people. You balance an outside career on top of all of this. Outside of this, you're also a medical provider, right? Nurse anesthetist, which
So-
I can only say when I'm asleep. It's a
Actually,
funny joke.
nice. All right, say Methodist.
Okay, Methodist,
Say anesthetist.
anesthetist. My tongue gets tied up on it. Probably why I'm not a Methodist. You work in the VA hospital?
Correct. So I'm a practitioner at the Minneapolis VA healthcare system,
Okay.
right across the street.
All
Makes
of-
commuting real easy.
Yeah, for sure. All of your patients are veterans.
Correct.
One of the things that I've always admired about that organization over there is the singularly, their focus, their mission is always to take care of veterans.
Yes, with an asterisk that of the last year and a half, I don't know if you heard, but there's been this public health crisis that sort of bubbled through the country and the world. The VA actually has started taking care of civilians.
They have.
It's called the Fourth Mission, and I guess if I'd put in for some VA pay today to spread the gospel. But
Wow.
so the Veterans Health Administration does care almost exclusively for veterans. Now that's 2 different crowds. There's those who incurred a service-connected disability. I mean, they were in the service, something happened, and they either requested coverage right away, or later on in life they said, hey, I really think that the reason I've got bladder cancer is because I was in Vietnam.
Sure.
And the VA says, yep, we're because of the things you were exposed to in Agent Orange and defoliants. Yep. There's also a group that served in the military, served honorably, and were discharged, but didn't necessarily incur any disability directly connected to it. However, at this stage in life, they don't have any other health care, and they don't have any means to provide themselves health care. And so the VA evaluates their means to provide health care and then steps in and provide it.
What's the biggest challenge you think we are facing when providing care for veterans? What do you think is the biggest issue when it comes to providing good care for vets?
Ooh, that's a tough one. So
I've been throwing you softballs all the way up until now.
Yeah, well, so understand, I'm a drone, right? So I go in, I do my job, I do it well, I do it in concert with the other, what I call internal customers at the VA. I would say the shoulder-to-shoulder, peer-to-peer work across departments at the VA, we work extremely hard to connect with each other. There's a lot of camaraderie over there between the different sections. We're like siblings or cousins, right? We'll make fun of each other and talk about how these people are. But in the end, we actually, when we pick up the phone, it's nothing but, hey, how can we get the right thing done legally, ethically, et cetera, for the vet? I mean, we could talk about the access, right? Do veterans know to ask? Not everyone knows to ask. There's bureaucracy and there's cumbersomeness, but once they get into the system, and it's also like the VA, when you say VA in big quotes, that is a large organization with multiple entities.
Right, it's not just about healthcare.
Yeah, so I work at the VA and friends will come to me and say, hey, how do I get my dad needs a copy of his discharge paperwork, his DD-214 from the 1950s. And I look at him like, I can tell you what the induction dose of propofol is to go to sleep. I can tell you where to put the EKG leads, but that's part of it has something to do with the VA. Or, hey, I hear that, my grandma can get a pension to help her pay for some costs because my grandfather was in the military. Or, hey, can you help me get my uncle's VA headstone? Like, yeah, that's a completely different office. So sometimes it's navigating, like, to whom do you go to? And the number one place I would refer people to, and I do, is to their county veteran service office.
I'm so glad that you mentioned that, because that has been something that I don't think is necessarily publicized as well as it could be. As if somebody qualifies for veterans care, even if they don't know, I served in the military, my ears are ringing, what do I do? Hey, you have somebody in your county that can help you through that. And it's just like when you were looking to join ROTC, or you showed up, you went to one recruiter and they handed you a bunch of paper. And you showed up and you went to another person and they helped you. And to me, that's what I see when I see these county VA administrators, is they're here and they will sit and they will help you. Is that accurate?
Yep. Yeah, and it's right. If you really want to go down a rabbit hole, the county level government in the U.S. is really a point that's taken for granted and glossed over, but that's where a lot of the rubber hits the road. That's where a lot of the action happens, whether it's veterans issues, right, helping vets navigate the plethora and kaleidoscope of things available, whether it's public health. That's a huge thing that's really come up in this last 2 years of people understand, oh, there is a public health department, and they do more than just inspect the buffets. But yeah, that's the county government. So I'd refer folks to the county, and it probably is just the access.
That's the biggest challenge facing vets, is the gaining access.
Yes.
All right. Well,
not finding parking though. We got plenty of parking over at the
plenty
VA.
of parking.
And
Okay.
we've also opened up community-based outpatient clinics. That's been an initiative in the last decade and a half. And I guess one of the last things would be, the VA today is not the VA of the 70s. And that when we look at the VA's internal and external reviews and customer surveys and stuff, the satisfaction shows extremely high. Not just on the ones we're getting internally, but when they do community surveys and we contract with companies to look at how people, the ones who are in the system love us. The people who haven't set foot in a VA or haven't seen it have a much different perspective. So it's sort of like an insider, hey, you guys can talk bad all you want, but the people who go here like it. And then the last part is the VA is interesting in that it's a government-run system. So I would say it's often a target for folks who don't think that's right, but when you dig into it, you see the cost per encounter significantly lower. The VA is able to negotiate for prices. As one of the largest single entity purchasers, the prices that we are told we get are significantly lower than other locations because of bulk value. But I could go on all day. But let's talk about the Guard.
We probably could. Better yet, there's so much more to cover here. Second half of the podcast, I like to have a little bit more fun, so we'll shift gears just a little bit. Maybe go back to the Guard. I don't know, because there's so much that makes everybody out here tick. Quick questions.
Yeah.
So here's the
Speed
rules.
round.
I interviewed an engineer once, and he really did a good job analyzing all these. So first thing that comes to your head, it's the lightning round. How's that? No analyst, no comment. Just give me your first answer that comes to your head. How's that? You ready?
You know I went through SEER, right?
Yes. You're going to be fine. All right, easy one. Fire trucks, red or yellow?
Red.
Movie or TV show that made you cry?
Beaches.
Sorry, I'm not supposed to laugh at these. Go-to karaoke song?
Friends in low places.
All right. Best travel destination?
Hawaii. Big Island. Kona.
Mullets are coming back. If you could, would you?
No, I'm high and tight till I die.
All right. Best hair band from the 80s?
You know I'm a dreamer, but my heart's a gold.
Impressive.
I had to
Motley
run away
Crue.
high, so I wouldn't come home low.
I got it. First Motley Crue answer that I got. That's good. All right. I am a red fire truck person as well, although most of the time that I was a firefighter, I was dealing with Air Force Ones and they were all yellow.
Oh.
And so, yeah, that's just one of those things.
Have you seen the lime green ones out east?
Yeah, I'd prefer not to. I'm still red fire trucks are just, it's the right thing to do. You were a part of the 43rd Mobile Army Surgical Hospital in Korea, and they call that the Hollywood unit because that's what MASH, the TV show, was based on.
So so back during the war, it was the 8055th Surgical Hospital Mobile Army. So the 8055th and the 8063rd were two MASH units that fed patients up to the 121 General.
Okay.
And then there was an individual who was in the unit, wrote a book, turned into the movie, and if you picture 8055, he transposed and changed the letters over to 4077th.
Ah.
So the unit, it was a real unit back in the 50s, up through the 70s, 80s. It was up north in the Western Corridor. And if you go online, you can read all the history about where it was. And so the legend handed down was that most of the characters in it were real. Mm-hmm. So they were, at the time, you could write about real people and just change the names.
Yeah.
And so they changed the name to the 407th. It came down to Camp Humphreys.
Yep.
Back in 70s, 80s. It stayed there. I was there from 92 to 94, and the unit closed down in 96.
Okay.
And that's because the MASH itself, we would take more than a soccer field to set up. It was like a 40-bed hospital out of tents and shipping containers that would expand out. But what we discovered was, in a fast-moving engagement, having a convoy 2 miles long and setting this thing up that took like a day was just not it was a non-starter anymore. So we transitioned while I was there to operating forward surgical teams.
Yeah.
3 vehicles, 20 people, completely dependent on outside forces for security, et cetera. So we would set up, so this is interesting, kind of a foreshadowing. We would go up north and support the forward support battalions or the main support battalions of the 2nd ID. The entity is called the Charlie Med or Charlie Company Medical. Mm-hmm. And some of these we'd set up on these river valleys next to these flat areas of gravel. And so we'd set up our hospital tent, and the war games would commence, and they'd get these simulated casualties in, and we would simulate doing surgery to them. And then they'd take them outside, and like a C-130 would come in and land, and they'd load up. This other group would take them and take off. And I was like, oh, that looks interesting. And then they'd leave, and we go back to doing our stuff.
And now here you are.
So I've been in this marks being the kind of the last change. So, for instance, I have flown every leg of the evacuation, or I've worked every level of patient evacuation, both as a frontline medic in a scout platoon for a tank battalion, to the intermediate treatment, or the rotary wing to the intermediate treatment, fixed wing from the intermediate treatment all the way back to the United States. Not at the same time, because that would be a killer, but I've done every leg of that, and then across the Pacific back to the U.S., and then within the U.S.
Have you ever, and I know there's HIPAA rules here, but have you ever, now on the far end of this, they've gotten out of the military and now they're a veteran, any synergies there? Have you seen a soldier that at one point you had seen along the leg?
No.
But you could now. So, I mean, really, you're so true. Every single leg along the way, all the way to veterans care.
Yep. But although, like when we're downrange, so I've deployed twice so far with, and I've come across other Minnesota Guard people, and I always make it a point. Like I was in Germany last summer, deployed, and we had, as a chief nurse of that, deployed AE element. So our mission was to fly from Germany down to the Middle East. Qatar is our default base. We configure C-17s, which we don't have here in Minneapolis, but again, that's part of our expected capability. So those are the large 4-engined, high T-tailed cargo planes. They look like flying guppies. Really great aircraft, though. They were designed with AE in mind. They have plug-ins on the wall to run oxygen. They have regular plug-ins to hook up electrical. It's my favorite plane for AE. I love the 130. I love the dirty 30s.
Sure.
But the 17 is really more of a practitioner's test bed. But I would review the cases coming through and read through each one just to make sure that the crew that was going to fly that mission had kind of a heads up or something to think about. And I would see Guard people come through and make it a point to get out to the flight line as they came through and say hi to them. It was always easy to see with the Red Bull patch on.
Oh yeah. Okay, so you know a bunch of MASH stuff, right? The whole history?
A chunk of it.
All
And
right.
the movie and the show. I mean, I was raised watching the show.
All right, well, so let's check on this. Radar had a stuffed animal. What was it?
A bear.
What president is Hawkeye Pierce named after?
Ooh, good question. No idea.
This is a trick question. Yeah, actually, it's Benjamin Franklin, and he was never president. So,
Yeah.
Colonel Potter's horse's name?
Trigger.
Sophie.
Dang it.
MASH was filmed in a state park in which state?
California.
What was the name of the state park?
Pass. I have no clue. What is it?
Malibu State Park.
Oh. I've seen the pictures where they filmed it.
Which actor or the character that he played was in both the movie and the TV show?
Radar.
Yep. Which character on the show do you most identify with?
Okay, if you would have asked me, a little while ago, it would have been more of like the Hawkeye.
Uh-huh.
Like the renegade, let's just get it done, let's have fun. Last 20 days, I am morphing into Sherman T. Potter.
Colonel Potter. Great. Every podcast has a drinking question, so here we go. You and Colonel Potter, the MASH commander, now that you're both commanders, I totally can see that morph. Sitting around sipping some good old brandy. Talking about
Brandy. She's
brandy.
a fine girl.
What a good wife she'd be.
Sorry, did that throw you
Waiting.
off?
But my life, my love, and my lady is the sea. Okay. Gosh, getting the music geek going today. This
I'm just
is
trying
fun.
to get the questions aren't going as well as I anticipated.
You're
so
doing
I'm trying
great.
To throw you off.
All right.
It's asymmetrical warfare, which is fourth generational warfare, which is, for those of you that like to read up on.
We'll get to that later. So you're sitting around sipping some good old-fashioned brandy, talking about lessons learned in former days. Now that you're commanding a medical unit.
Operational unit that accomplishes a medical mission.
Gosh, you're good at that. Now that you're commanding that, what do you think the similarities in command between commanding an operational unit that provides medical services is and a Korean MASH unit in modern medical care?
Right, so there's always going to be the core functions you have to do and you have to prepare for on a regular basis. And there's always going to be the red herrings or the things you can never prepare for. So that's one of the challenges we have with our training is we have some static training profiles that we do and that we've done forever in the expectation the way Aeromed. There's like the mission set we set, like the 2 nurses, 3 med techs, but events of 5 weeks ago and what happened in the Aeromedical Evacuation System and the Air Mobility Command and the air bridge that was set up out of Kabul took a lot of those things and just said, all right, we physically just cannot do this mission with this static group of people and try to be the best that we can be. Same thing with the MASH unit. They do what they could. So they talk about the principle of meatball surgery.
Yeah.
You're doing life, limb, and eyesight saving surgery. It's not going to be pretty. It's just enough to ligate bleeders, maybe do a quick amputation and things like that. You do what you can with what you have at the moment. And that's kind of the idea behind AE is, knock on wood, we'll have air superiority, we'll have plenty of bandages, we'll have plenty of equipment, rest in between flights, and a full complement of people. But one of my drivers for the organization, for the unit, is as safely as we can, knowing that you can never eliminate risk. You can only search for it, recognize it, mitigate it, is to build training profiles and train my airmen so that they can accomplish the mission nobody wants to have to do under the conditions nobody thinks we could accomplish a mission under repeatedly, and be confident doing that and return home alive and with honor.
I think that last one especially would be something that you and Colonel Potter would agree on, keeping folks safe. Hey, Colonel Zimmerman, it has been an absolute pleasure having you on Beneath the Wing. We are going to close this out, and as we do, I think we are going to probably enjoy singing something together from Looking Glass. Yes, that's who sang Brandy. We'll let you go. Please join me again on Beneath the Wing as we discover some of the great stories and people serving out here at the 133rd Airlift Wing. Take care.